A 1968 freight directory listed 450 less-than-truckload carriers. Every one of them is gone now. Not most. All of them. One law did that, and the man who pulled the trigger was never elected to anything. In 1979, if you owned a trucking company, the single most valuable thing you had wasn't your tractors or your terminals. It was a piece of paper from the federal government, an operating certificate. And a good one could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, because without it, you legally could not haul freight between two cities. That certificate told you exactly which commodities you were allowed to carry, over exactly which routes, within exactly which patch of territory. Some carriers held such narrow authority that they ran loaded in one direction and dead-headed back empty. To add a single city, you went before the Interstate Commerce Commission and proved that the shippers there actually needed you, and if a carrier already on that route could serve them just as well, your request got denied. The standard was called public convenience and necessity. In plain English, the companies already inside the fence got to vote on whether anyone new was allowed to climb in. Inside that fence, the money was good, and it was steady. A union driver hauling for one of these carriers made a solid middle-class living, with benefits most factory men envied. The rates were high, the margins were reliable, and none of it was a free market. It was a cartel, and it was completely legal. Carriers sat down together in regional groups called rate bureaus and agreed on what to charge, not in secret, not looking over their shoulders for a prosecutor, out in the open, because Congress had gone out of its way to make it legal. In 1948, over President Truman's veto, Congress passed the Reed-Bullwinkle Act and exempted the truckers from the antitrust laws that would have put men in prison for doing the very same thing in almost any other business. Nearly every carrier belonged to a bureau. Most customers paid whatever rate the bureau set. There was nowhere else to take it. That one detail is what made the whole machine run. When the Teamsters came to the table and won a raise, no carrier fought it very hard, because every carrier was going to pay that same raise, and every carrier was going to pass it straight through to the shippers as a higher rate. Nobody lost ground. When everyone charges the identical regulated price, a wage increase isn't a threat. It's just another number you add to the invoice. So where did this fence come from? Here's the irony sitting underneath the entire story. The trucking industry helped build it, then begged Washington to lock the door. Back in the Depression, freight rates were collapsing. Trucks were undercutting each other into the dirt, and the big carriers and the railroads went to the government asking for protection from what they called cutthroat competition. They wanted the doors shut. In 1935, Congress obliged, and the Motor Carrier Act dropped the whole industry under the control of the Interstate Commerce Commission. The men who pushed hardest for that cage were the large operators, the ones who already held routes worth protecting. It wasn't forced on an unwilling industry. They ordered it, built to spec. For 45 years, the arrangement held. But by the 1970s, something was eating at it from the outside, and it had nothing to do with any law. The interstate highway system. All those terminal heavy carriers packed into the Northeast had been built for a slower world of two-lane roads and short hops from city to city. The new interstates rewarded speed and long hauls, and the old model started to bleed. Associated Transport, a company that once called itself the biggest trucking outfit in the country, collapsed in 1976, 4 years before anyone deregulated a thing. The fire was already lit. What came next was the accelerant. Everybody remembers the signing. The Motor Carrier Act of 1980, the law that finally opened the doors. But the law is not where this story actually turns. By February of 1979, 16 months before Congress passed anything, the Interstate Commerce Commission had already done most of the work itself. The same agency that had guarded the fence for 4 decades had quietly started tearing it down. The Commission's own chairman said the goals could be reached through administrative action alone, and that legislation confirming them wasn't even necessary. His successor essentially handed Congress a deadline: pass a reform bill by June 30th of 1980, or the Commission would simply keep deregulating on its own. These weren't politicians. They were regulators and economists appointed across three administrations, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, who had decided on the merits that the entire regulated system was a bad deal for the country. And when the law did pass, the Commission read it in the most pro-competitive way it possibly could. They implemented it harder than it was written. That is who pulled the trigger, not a president with a pen. A handful of unelected regulators who had made up their minds that the world your paycheck depended on had to go. Here's what that meant on a Monday morning for a company that had done nothing wrong. Remember that certificate, the one worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Carriers had bought their authority piece by expensive piece over years, one city at a time. Bankers treated it as a hard asset, collateral you could borrow against. When the doors swung open and almost anyone could get authority for next to nothing, that asset didn't just fall in value, it went to zero. Overnight. Across the industry, operating rights that the reformers themselves valued at $3 to $6 billion simply evaporated. A carrier could be running full trucks, making payroll, serving every customer it always had, and be insolvent on paper that same morning, because the single biggest thing on its books had stopped existing. Some of them went to court, trying to write the loss off on their taxes. That is how real the money had been. Then the pass-through ran in reverse. The only reason a raise never hurt anyone was that every carrier paid it and every carrier charged the same. Kill the uniform rate, and that logic turns inside out. Now the non-union outfits pouring into the business could undercut you on price for one simple reason. They weren't paying union scale. Labor stopped being a number on the invoice. It became the thing sinking the ship. The Teamsters, the union nobody in that industry ever imagined could be pushed around, sat down and gave back wages faster than they ever had before, because non-union drivers were flooding in and eroding everything the union had built. In the late 1970s, roughly 6 in 10 drivers carried a union card. By the mid-1980s, it was closer to 3. Wages slid right along with it. The men who held their seniority didn't all take the same hit, but the world where a trucking job meant a guaranteed middle-class life was finished. And this is where the easy version of the story gets it wrong. Deregulation did not kill trucking. Trucking exploded. Total employment in the industry roughly doubled, from about 1 million in 1978 to 2 million by 1996. Freight got cheaper for everybody who shipped it. More men drove trucks than ever before. What died wasn't trucking. What died was that one specific world, the protected, unionized rate bureau system and the 450 carriers that had lived their whole lives inside it. There's one last turn, and it's the one almost nobody tells. The man you'd expect to throw a party over all this, Ronald Reagan, the free market president, actually moved to slow it down. The Teamsters had endorsed him, and there was a debt to settle. His administration put a former Nevada regulator named Reese Taylor in charge of the commission, and under Taylor, the commission began reading the deregulating law as narrowly as it could get away with, denying broad authority, cutting wide territory requests down to single cities, dragging applicants back into oral hearings in front of a judge. According to reporting from the time, Reagan had assured the Teamsters he opposed trucking deregulation, telling them it couldn't all be done at once, that it had to be phased in. How much of that was Reagan himself, and how much was Taylor running his own play, people still argue about. But it hardly matters because it failed. The doors were already open, and there was no pulling them shut again. The commission that had built the cage, guarded it for 45 years, and then torn it down, could not rebuild it even when the White House wanted it back. By the end of 1995, the Interstate Commerce Commission was abolished, the agency itself gone. And the 450 names in that 1968 directory went with it, not because anyone set out to destroy them, but because the paper that made them worth anything quietly turned back into paper,